Are you saying that you do some things for money?
Yes.
Morgan.
Huh?
It's an art.
Yes. But I don't want to die a pauper because art, you know. I mean, I was thinking about friends of mine like Modigliani, Van Gogh, Monet. Monet didn't die a pauper, but
Van Gogh did.
Yeah, Van Gogh did, and Modigliani did.
Yeah, but you're beyond pauperdom, aren't you?
When someone as steady as Morgan Freeman suddenly looks unbalanced, you know something serious is breaking through the surface. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't a role. This was raw reality colliding with a man the world has trusted for decades. For generations, Morgan Freeman's voice has represented calm.
Right.
Yeah,
It's true.
true.
So,
Yep.
and I would say 99.9% of human beings don't want to die. And so
Maybe a
death
little
is
higher.
nothing.
Yeah, right.
So you got to have something. If you want to be with me. Stop it.
Authority and wisdom. It's the voice people associate with truth, reassurance, and balance. So when that same voice wavered, when his posture stiffened and his expression tightened, it sent a clear signal. Something was terribly wrong. What unfolded during his unexpected appearance wasn't scripted emotion or polished commentary. It was a man watching a long-ignored nightmare finally step into daylight, and for the past 2 days, the story surrounding the death of Rob Reiner had been wrapped carefully in polite language.
I want to try to talk some sense to him. Tell him the way things are. But I can't. That kid's long gone, and this old man is all that's left.
Public statements were filled with soft edges, words chosen to lower the temperature, phrases designed to protect legacies rather than confront reality. But Morgan Freeman refused to follow that script. Instead of offering comfort or recycled sympathy, he tore straight through the packaging. He forced everyone to look directly at what had been sitting beneath the surface all along. His message was clear. Silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate.
Whatever. He said, why don't you, shoot the reaction shots and that will give me. So, I got Tom Cruise cut away, Demi Moore, Kevin Bacon, I got, Kevin Pollak. I mean, the judge, the jury. I'm doing all the reaction shots. And every time he's off camera, he gives exactly the same performance that you see that's on camera.
According to Freeman, what happened didn't begin with a single violent night. It began years earlier with ignored warning signs and carefully maintained denial. And in his view, choosing not to see those signs wasn't neutrality. It was participation. That's what made his words land so hard. This wasn't a distant industry connection either. Freeman and Rob Reiner shared a genuine bond formed during the filming of The Bucket List. That project wasn't just about endings, it was about reflection, legacy, and the weight of unfinished business. Freeman revealed that during late-night conversations on set, Rob often spoke openly about his children. But whenever the conversation turned to his son, Nick Reiner, everything changed. The energy shifted. The air went cold. Freeman, a man whose entire career has been built on observing human behavior, noticed it immediately. Silence, tension. The things left unsaid. He explained that he didn't need words to understand what was happening. At one point, Freeman stopped himself mid-sentence during the interview. He physically stepped back from the microphone. His body reacted before his words could catch up. And then he said something that sent shockwaves through the room. We all saw the cracks, and we all handed Rob the glue to fix them, knowing it wouldn't hold. That single line reframed everything. While headlines focused on investigation details and scenes outside the Brentwood property, Freeman was talking about something deeper: patterns, pressure, years of enabling behavior that slowly built toward this ending. This wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a long, ignored descent. Then Freeman revealed a moment that had never been public before. A private dinner, closed doors, industry insiders only. Nick arrived without warning and the entire room froze. Freeman described the tension as instant and suffocating. Not awkwardness, not discomfort, danger. Rob Reiner, usually the loudest presence in any room, suddenly folded into himself. His voice lowered, his posture changed. Freeman said he physically shrank. That was the moment it clicked. A man considered untouchable in Hollywood was deeply afraid inside his own family. And that realization changed everything. This is where Morgan Freeman's words stopped sounding like commentary and started sounding like a warning that arrived just a little too late. What he shared next was never meant for the public. According to Freeman, Rob Reiner reached out to him just weeks before everything unraveled. This wasn't a casual check-in between old friends. It wasn't a nostalgic conversation about aging or past films. It was a late-night call, heavy, uneasy, and filled with fear Rob didn't know how to name. Freeman explained that Rob never asked his questions directly. Instead, he circled around them, posing hypotheticals that weren't hypothetical at all. Questions about boundaries, about responsibility, about the unthinkable moment when love turns into danger. He asked whether there comes a point when protecting yourself means stepping away from your own child. That kind of question doesn't come from comfort, it comes from desperation. Think about the weight of that. A man with endless influence, resources, and access to every kind of help imaginable, quietly asking if it was acceptable to put distance between himself and his son. Freeman admitted that he told Rob to focus on keeping Michelle safe, to finally draw a hard line to create a space between himself and the chaos that had been consuming their home for years. But even as he said it, Freeman could hear it in Rob's voice. Rob wasn't built that way. The same empathy that made him a powerful storyteller was the very thing working against him. The compassion behind films that shaped generations wasn't an act. It was who he was at his core. And Nick understood that better than anyone. Freeman made it clear that Nick knew exactly which emotional buttons to press and when to press them. He knew vulnerability would trigger comfort. He knew pressure would push Rob towards solutions instead of walls. That's why Freeman completely rejected the idea that this was a sudden break or a random spiral. He pushed back hard against the clean, digestible narrative already forming in public discussion. According to him, this wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Nick knew the house by muscle memory. He knew routines, access points, timing. He knew that if he appeared fragile, his mother would respond with care. And he knew that if tension escalated, Rob would reach for resources instead of distance. Freeman didn't say this lightly. He knew exactly how severe it sounded, but he made one thing painfully clear. Kindness became a tool used against them. As difficult as it is to hear, Freeman insisted that Rob and Michelle weren't careless. They were decent people caught in an impossible position. They believed love could still diffuse what was already unstable. They kept hoping compassion would calm something that was primed to explode. Then Freeman shifted to the night everything ended, and this is where his account sharply diverged from the official summaries. Reports describe the scene in cold, technical language, details stripped of humanity. But Freeman, speaking from what he described as direct knowledge, from people close to the situation painted a far more disturbing picture. One detail immediately stood out to him. There were no clear signs that Rob tried to protect himself. That single fact changes everything. No struggle doesn't mean acceptance. It means trust. It means Rob didn't believe, even in those final seconds, that his son would cross that line. Freeman's voice faltered as he explained what that truly means. Rob wasn't facing a stranger. He wasn't bracing for harm. He was standing in front of his child, still trying to calm him, still trying to connect, still trying to pull him back from the edge. Freeman said quietly that Rob didn't end his life fighting someone unknown. He ended it reaching for someone he loved. That image cuts through every headline, every theory, every speculation. What remains is the unbearable reality of a father who refused to believe the worst until belief was no longer an option. And that, Freeman explained, is exactly why he spoke out when everyone else stayed silent. In Hollywood, moments like this are usually softened, stories are blurred, details are buried beneath respectful distance. Silence becomes a form of protection. But Freeman made it clear that silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was hiding lessons that should have been faced years ago. From this point on, Morgan Freeman's words stopped feeling personal and started feeling institutional. He wasn't just talking about a family tragedy anymore. He was talking about a system that had quietly cushioned danger for years. Freeman openly criticized the circle surrounding Nick, the friends who kept slipping him money after Rob finally tried to draw a line, the industry connections who kept reopening doors that should have stayed firmly shut, the people who offered endless second chances, not because Nick earned them, but because of the last name he carried. At one moment, Freeman didn't soften his language at all. We created something dangerous by feeding it, he said. And then we left Rob and Michelle alone to deal with the consequences. That wasn't frustration. That was an accusation. And in places like Beverly Hills, that accusation doesn't land lightly. Freeman made it clear that Nick Reiner wasn't some misunderstood teenager. He was a grown man with access to resources most people will never see in a lifetime. Top-tier recovery programs, elite therapy, financial safety nets, even career opportunities handed to him without effort. And yet, accountability never truly arrived. Freeman pointed out the double standard already forming in public conversation. He knows exactly how cases like this are usually framed. Claims about impaired judgment, reduced responsibility, emotional instability. He shut that narrative down before it could take root. According to Freeman, there was nothing unclear about Nick's state of mind. He acknowledged that Nick had struggled with substances between the ages of 15 and 19. He had been in and out of rehab. It was a difficult period. But Freeman emphasized something crucial. He interacted with Nick personally. He described him as fully aware, calculated, emotionally manipulative. Coming from someone with Freeman's credibility, those words carry enormous weight. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't speculation. It was a first-hand assessment from a man the public has trusted for decades. Whether intentional or not, Freeman had now positioned himself as a powerful voice before any trial even began. And the ripple effect was immediate. Other figures close to Rob, people like Billy Crystal and Tom Cruise, went completely silent. That silence felt heavy, not because they disagreed, but because Freeman had gone further than anyone expected. He had cut through the rumors before they could spiral out of control. Whispers had already begun, people questioning Rob's role, hinting at provocation, suggesting something dark had been hidden inside the home. Freeman addressed that directly. He described the Reiner household as warm, stable, and deeply loving. He spoke about Michelle Singer Reiner with genuine reverence. He portrayed her as the one who held everything together, always choosing patience, always choosing hope. In Freeman's telling, there was no darkness inside that home until it was brought in. He framed a tragedy not as a family failure, but as an intrusion, one that overwhelmed even the strongest foundation. And then he mentioned something that instantly caught attention, a script. Freeman revealed that Rob had been quietly working on a new project, something deeply personal. He didn't share details, but he hinted that Nick may have discovered it before everything collapsed. The implication lingered heavily. If Rob was writing from his own life, exploring family struggle, personal demons, unresolved tension, and Nick recognized himself in those pages, not as a hero, but as a warning, that realization could have cut deeply, especially for someone driven by ego and control. Sometimes, Freeman suggested, truth on paper cuts deeper than confrontation ever could. And that's where he left the public, staring at the uncomfortable intersection of art, family, and accountability. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He was trying to stop the story from being rewritten, because in his view, the truth was already painful enough. As Morgan Freeman continued, something in his tone shifted. The anger softened, the certainty cracked. And what surfaced instead was guilt. He revealed that he had spoken with Michelle Singer Reiner just 2 days before everything collapsed. Not a dramatic call, not a warning-filled conversation. She didn't sound alarmed. She sounded tired, not afraid, just worn down in a way that only comes from years of constant tension, careful wording, and emotional navigation. Freeman said her voice carried exhaustion, not panic, the kind of fatigue that settles in when hope has been stretched thin, but not yet abandoned. Michelle mentioned that Nick was planning to come by for the holidays. One more attempt to reset things, one more effort to pull the family back into alignment. Freeman said that moment set off a deep unease inside him. He advised her to meet somewhere public, somewhere neutral. He warned her not to bring that energy back into the home. That home mattered to him. He described it as a place of peace, something almost sacred, a space that had remained stable despite years of strain. And now imagine carrying the weight of that conversation afterward. Imagine being the person who gave the warning that wasn't followed, not because it was ignored, but because love kept hoping. That, Freeman admitted, is what fractured him. What the public saw wasn't just grief. It was survivor's guilt. He questioned every decision, wondered if he should have shown up himself, if he should have made another call, if he should have forced intervention instead of trusting that things might still resolve. Reality has a brutal way of settling in once everything stops moving. Freeman then shifted to how the world should remember Rob Reiner, not just as a filmmaker, but as a human being. He spoke about Rob's work with quiet reverence. Films like When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride weren't just entertainment. They were emotional landmarks, stories that built warmth, connection, and joy for millions of people. To know that someone who created so much comfort met such a cold, isolating end created a mental collision that was hard to process. Freeman said that the man audiences loved was real, but the private world Rob lived in was far heavier than anything that ever reached the screen. Fame didn't create immunity, wealth didn't heal instability, status didn't block harm. Freeman stripped away the illusion that powerful people live in a different reality. Pain doesn't negotiate with success. Loss doesn't respect reputation. Then he turned his focus back to Nick, and this time he didn't hold back. He described someone who believed entitlement was inherited, someone who moved through life expecting doors to open simply because of his last name. Freeman stressed that this went far beyond arrogance. He called it corrosive. He recalled an incident on a film set where Nick lashed out at a production assistant over something trivial. The moment escalated quickly, and Rob stepped in, not to defend his son, but to apologize on his behalf. That image stayed with Freeman, a respected legend apologizing because his adult son couldn't regulate himself. He said Rob looked diminished that day, embarrassed, exhausted. And that moment wasn't isolated. It was part of a growing pattern. Disrespect turned into financial pressure. Financial pressure turned into emotional strain. And emotional strain crossed into something far more destructive. Freeman emphasized that this story didn't explode overnight. It unfolded gradually, predictably, tragically. Each ignored moment stacked onto the last. Each compromise pushed the boundary further back. In his eyes, this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning about what happens when love keeps stepping forward while boundaries keep stepping back. The most painful truth of all, Freeman said, is that everyone involved believed there was still time. At the core of everything he shared, there was one thing Freeman was openly grieving, not just the loss of a friend, but the collapse of hope itself. Rob's greatest weakness, he said, was the same thing that defined him as a father. He never stopped believing his son would return. And that leads to the question Freeman left hanging in the air, a question meant for every parent listening. At what point does hope stop being love and start becoming danger? By the time Morgan Freeman reached the final moments of his statement, there was no confusion left in his voice. This wasn't grief speaking anymore. It was clarity. He made it painfully clear that whatever sympathy might have existed ended the moment the line was crossed, not once, but twice. Freeman suggested that anger, impulse, or emotional chaos might explain a single act, but to turn on the person who spent years trying to stabilize, protect, and heal you required something colder, something detached. He said he had only encountered that level of emotional emptiness when studying the darkest characters of his career. And when he said it, there was no dramatization, no flourish, just certainty. The interview ended with a question that stunned the room. How should Rob Reiner be remembered? Most expected reflections on his career, his impact, his legacy in cinema. Freeman didn't go there. He paused, looked straight ahead, and said Rob should be remembered as a man who loved without limits. Then he added something that landed like a final verdict. He said Nick should be remembered as someone who never learned how to love at all. That contrast reframed everything. This was no longer a celebrity story. It was a story about the collapse of connection inside a family, about what happens when love keeps extending itself into a space where it's no longer returned. Freeman didn't ask for privacy. He didn't urge silence. He didn't suggest moving on. Instead, he asked the public to look harder, to stop skimming headlines and start examining patterns. He openly acknowledged a truth many avoid. Powerful families often see different outcomes. controlled environments instead of consequences, temporary isolation instead of real accountability. And Freeman made it clear he wouldn't allow this story to dissolve into softened language. He wasn't speaking out of revenge, he was speaking out of resolve. There was also an undercurrent of betrayal in everything he said. Not just personal betrayal, but institutional betrayal. Freeman hinted that people knew Nick was unstable and chose silence anyway. Incidents brushed aside, arguments dismissed, aggression reframed to avoid embarrassment. Reputation protection became more important than intervention. And in doing so, the system may have sealed the outcome it hoped to avoid. Freeman suggested that there were moments years earlier when real accountability could have changed everything. If consequences had arrived then, this story might look very different today. Instead, behavior was managed instead of confronted. Good intentions didn't cancel real-world outcomes. Sometimes they accelerated them. He raised a chilling idea without stating it directly. The story had already shifted permanently. One of the most trusted voices in the world had reframed it before any courtroom argument could begin. And that mattered, because juries don't ignore voices they've trusted for decades. When Freeman stepped away from the cameras, he did it alone. No handlers, no crowd, just a man carrying a truth heavier than anything he'd ever delivered on screen. He looked older, not because of age, but because loss reshapes people in ways time never can. The legal process will move forward. Dates will be set. Arguments will be made. But in the court of public opinion, a line has already been drawn. Nick isn't being judged only for what he did. He's being judged for what he destroyed. A family, a lifetime of trust. The most basic bond that exists between parent and child. Freeman didn't speak to shock anyone. He spoke so the truth couldn't be rewritten later, because silence didn't protect anyone here. And truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that remains. By the time the camera stopped rolling, one thing was undeniable. This story could no longer be reshaped. Morgan Freeman didn't leave a space for reinterpretation. He didn't offer ambiguity. What he delivered wasn't speculation. It was a line drawn with painful precision, a reminder that when patterns are ignored long enough, endings don't arrive as surprises. They arrive as consequences. Freeman made it clear that what's coming next won't stay contained inside a courtroom. Trials like this don't just examine actions, they expose environments, private circles, quiet protections that once felt harmless but now look dangerous in hindsight. He hinted that other voices would follow. Once one person breaks the silence, others find the courage to speak. Stories long dismissed as rumors begin to resurface. Moments brushed aside as complicated get re-examined with new clarity. The carefully maintained image surrounding the Reiner family won't collapse all at once. It will unravel slowly, piece by piece, and what remains won't be flattering. It won't be simple, but it will be honest. Freeman framed this not as gossip and not as spectacle, but as a modern tragedy unfolding in real time, one that feels scripted only because the warning signs were so painfully familiar. Rob Reiner was a storyteller. He understood structure. He understood escalation. He knew unresolved tension doesn't disappear. It intensifies. That's the most haunting part of all. The idea that someone who understood narratives so deeply may have sensed where things were heading, yet they still hoped the ending could be rewritten. Freeman's heartbreak comes from knowing he couldn't alter that final act. All he could do was describe what was left behind. And what was left behind was uncomfortable, necessary, impossible to ignore. He left the public with one final truth. Turning away doesn't protect anyone. If something like this can happen inside a guarded neighborhood, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and opportunity, then no amount of status can fully shield a family when something inside is already breaking. When Morgan Freeman finally walked away, he did it alone, not because he wanted attention, but because carrying truth often isolates the person willing to speak it. He looked older, not from age, but from loss. Losing a close friend reshapes you. Losing one this way fractures something deeper. It shakes your belief in how the world is supposed to work. And watching someone as grounded as Freeman lose that certainty unsettled everyone who saw it. The legal process will move forward. Arguments will be made. Strategies will unfold. But in the court of public opinion, a verdict has already begun to form. Not because of emotion, but because silence finally broke. This story isn't about celebrity anymore. It's about boundaries ignored, warnings dismissed, and love stretched past its breaking point. Freeman didn't speak to shock the world. He spoke so the truth couldn't be rewritten later. And now the question isn't what happened. The question is whether we'll recognize the same patterns when they appear again before it's too late. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. If it made you question familiar narratives, that matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this tragedy could have been prevented? Or was the ending already written years ago? If you want to stay updated as more details surface and other voices begin to speak, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. The next chapter of this story is already unfolding, and you won't want to miss what comes next.